Okay, so today, as I said, we're going to take a little bit of a detour. Just close all so that we don't have Bibles and windows and stuff in our way. Close all. And then what I want you to do is I want you to open the highlighters palette. Now you can do that by going to Tools, Library, Highlighting, or in the command box you can just start to type the word highlighter, and it will say Show Highlighting. Now highlighting is going to open in this left-hand side column just like it does Favorites. Logos likes highlighting and favorites in this place all the time. You can move it wherever you want, but every time you ask Logos to open it, that's where it's going to put it. So eventually you just learn to say, okay, if that's where you want it, that's where I'll keep it. But what highlighting allows us to do, and this is actually one of the really cool features of Logos, is we can actually highlight text. We've looked at this a little bit already, just making a simple selection and choosing a highlighter. But I really want to go through this and show you some really powerful features here. If you collapse the palettes by just clicking the little contextual arrows next to each palette title, you'll see that there are about 6 or 7 palettes created for you. The first one is called Solid Colors, and if you expand that, you notice that it's just simple solid color highlighters. The ones at the bottom are more like a traditional ink highlighter. You just would take a yellow pen and highlight the text, and it kind of highlights the background. But the other thing you can do is you can actually change the color of the text. Rather than drawing a highlighter mark, you can actually change the color. We'll actually play with that a little bit. And so you've got these basic solid color highlights. The emphasis markup is really here just to show you all the different kinds of things you can do. For example, you can turn the text to all caps, or you can do underlining in any color you want. You can make text bold, you can draw boxes, you can draw brackets. You can make double line boxes, you can do double underlines, triple underlines. I think you can even do quadruple underlines. You can put graphics at the beginning and end of a word. You can use carets. You can make the text bigger. You can do wavy lines, pencil lines, all kinds of strike through. You can create any kind of highlighter you want. Now these are an example. And here's my frustration. These ones that they've already made, you can't get rid of. And you really can't change their order. I wish we could just hide them, because what I'm going to suggest you do is make your own highlighter palette. And there's going to be a reason I'm going to tell you that in just a second. But you've got all this emphasis markup. Then you have highlighter pens, which is just basic highlighters. Like if you went to Target and bought a package of highlighters, you're just going to have all these different color highlighters. Then you have inductive. Now inductive is actually a Bible study method in which you mark like all the words related to death with a little tombstone. Or all the words related to angels with a little halo. And this is actually, you can buy books on how to do this inductive study method. You can even buy Bibles that are called inductive study Bibles. And they'll tell you at the beginning of each book what words to look for, and maybe even suggest how you mark them. Anything having to do with the resurrection, be it a cross or the tomb or the resurrection, you mark with a cross or something along those lines. But again, the purpose of this for ours is you can start to see that you can start to add these little graphics in. You can, the books of law or anything having to do with law looks like 2 little 10 Commandments tablets behind the word. And you've got all these additional little graphics you can do, or swipe throughs. The point of showing you this is to really show you that I believe, while it's not infinite, the number of highlighting options is probably in the millions. Seriously. The number of choices we have multiplied out by every possible choice, you probably have the capability to make just about any kind of highlighter you could ever think in your entire life, and never run out of room. Because everything's tweakable. Everything is customizable. Now, what else do you guys have besides inductive? You don't have keywords. That's one of mine. My highlighters is one of mine. Do you guys have anything else?
That's all we have.
You just have those first four? Okay. The rest of these, you see, I have two that are called Tech Class, because I keep making new ones. But one of the neat things is that you can create your own palette. So up at the top, just create New Palette. Just click New Palette. I didn't mean to click it twice. And call this Tech Class. Or you can call it My Highlighters. You can call it really whatever you want. Now, we've looked at how these work, and we're gonna add some into that in just a few minutes. But I want to show you a couple of kind of cool things. Open a Bible. Just open your New American Standard. I'm just going to mess with solid color. And it really doesn't matter where we are. Go to Philippians 1. It really doesn't matter where your Bible is open. I'm just going to go to Philippians 1. And I think it's interesting that this phrase, overseers and deacons. So I can select it with my mouse, and I can just make it blue foreground. And it actually changed that text to blue. Now, one of the advantages of highlighters, unlike the way we're doing it right now is just like doing it in your paper Bible. It's a very manual process. You select the text you want to highlight. You highlight it with whatever highlighter you want, right? I mean, that's a very manual process. But the one advantage is I can turn these off and on by going to my visual filters. If I go up here to the visual filters menu, the little 3 bowling balls stacked on top of each other, or 3 cannonballs stacked on top of each other. As I scroll down in this section called Notes, I should have a note file called Solid Colors. Do you see it? If I click off of Solid Colors, you'll notice that my highlighting went away. It didn't get erased, it's just not visible. So if I go back to Solid Colors and click it on, they come back on. So it's a way of turning your highlighting off and on. But here's my problem with this process. You'll notice that you have solid color, emphasis markup, highlighter pens, and inductive. If you choose highlighters from all of those different palettes, you're now going to have 4 palettes in your visual filters that you have to turn off and on to turn on all your highlights and turn off all your highlights. So the better way for me has finally been to make my own palette, create all of my own highlighters. I can look at the other ones to get ideas, but I create all of my own highlighters, and that way all of my highlights come from one palette. And so if I want to turn off all of my highlights, I click one box and they all turn off. I click one box, they all turn on. Does it make sense? Do you see the logic there? Otherwise, in that visual filters menu, I have to find all the other palettes. Now here's where it comes in. When you start playing with these visual filters, and that's what we're going to do today, we're going to start messing with visual filters. And visual filters are really cool. You can highlight all kinds of things, some manually, some automatically. You open your Bible and you see all these highlights, and you think, oh, I want to turn those off for right now. That's not really what I'm focused on. I want to look for some other things, and this is kind of all in my way. So you go to your visual menu, your visual filters menu, and you turn off the particular visual filter that you think is doing all the highlighting. But there's still a bunch of stuff highlighted. You've got to figure out what's causing the highlighting. And if you've chosen from multiple palettes, you may forget that one highlighter was from the emphasis markup palette. You may just forget that. Well, you're going to have to find emphasis markup in that list somewhere and click it off to see if that's what's causing the problem. So if you just consolidate everything into one palette, I find it much easier to control what your highlighters are, gives you a bigger choice, and also allows you more flexibility in turning them off and turning them on. So you can do whatever you want, but learn from my previous mistakes. I think you'll find it easier to just have one palette and go from there. So let's say, for example, see, I just tried to delete. See, this is the other problem. We have tech class, right? I have tech class 1, 2, and 3. because I've done this before. I just tried to delete Tech Class 3, and I go in here and I say delete. And I go in here and say delete. Well, see, it says 4 styles are still in use. Somewhere in my visual filters or in my notes, I actually used 4 highlighters from this palette, and they're trying to find those is going to be a nightmare. So I'm kind of stuck with just leaving those here for now. I did it as a sample in class probably, but I'd have to go back through all my visual filters and see what highlighters I used and what palettes they're from in order to find them to get rid of that. So again, that's a reason why making one palette and sticking with it makes it much easier for you. All right. So let's look at this first one, which is just solid color. And let's say we wanted to use one of these as a basis for starting our own palette. Let's just take the blue foreground one. When you hover over these highlighters, you see this little context arrow next to them. When you click on it, you have restyle annotations, you've got shortcut keys, you've got all kinds of stuff, right? Now, unfortunately, with these palettes, you cannot change the existing ones in the palette. You have to create your own. And what you used to be able to do, and mine doesn't seem to be able to do it, is I used to be able to duplicate it or move it to another palette, but it seems like they've changed that. So let's try to recreate this blue foreground in our palette that we call Tech Class or Tech Class 3 or whatever. I'm going to go ahead and do a new one since my other ones are going to be cluttered up. So go to this new class. I'm just going to call mine Class. And go to its context arrow and say add a new style. Add a new style is where you have all of these text effects, and we're going to see all the different options. So you can name the style. We'll name this one in a second after we decide what it is. But the first category is font styling. So if you click the context arrow, you've got all kinds of choices. You can change the default font to a different font if you want. I do not recommend you do that. Unless you want your Bible to start looking like a ransom note, don't mess with the fonts themselves. Style the fonts, but don't start saying, okay, I want all the verbs Helvetica, and I want all the adjectives, Comic Sans. It destroys the readability of your text. So I typically don't create highlighters that change the font itself. I can change the size of the font here, and if you increase it by a percentage, you'll notice the preview shows you what it's going to do. Now, this is another thing that I don't typically do, but if you want to do it that way, that's fine. I don't usually change the size of my fonts either, because again, in the middle of a sentence, you've got this giant word, and it kind of becomes distracting. So I usually don't mess with the font or the size. But the next box, the very first box, is the color. So if we wanted to just make a highlighter like that blue foreground, we can just go down here and select that baby blue, and you'll notice that it shows you in the preview what it's going to look like. And so I'm going to call this blue text. And when I type the name and hit tab, you'll notice in the preview box, it shows me what the title is, and it styles it from there. And my screen is doing something a little goofy. It's kind of cutting off the letters for some reason, but yours probably shouldn't. From there, you can make it bold. If you click on bold, it's going to make it blue and bold.
We hit save, right, Michael? Is that right?
No, you don't have to hit save yet. You can, but you don't have to.
It'll just hold it.
Yeah, it'll just keep doing it until we're finished with the style. So you've got bold. You can make it italics. You can italicize it. For some reason, it's not letting me italicize. Is italics working for anybody else?
Yeah.
Okay. My screen is, I can tell I've got a glitch going, so Yours is probably okay. The next one is small caps. Small caps turns the first letter looks like a regular size letter, the capital, but then all of the lowercase letters become small capital letters as well. So that's a style that can be useful. You can make something all capitals. You can make the text a superscript or a subscript. Now, I don't do that very often because I don't want the words themselves to become superscript or subscript, but you have those options. So for this one, we're just going to create light blue, call it blue text or light blue text or whatever you want to call it, and hit save. Now, inside your palette, you should have a highlighter called blue text. I'm going to go back over to the text that I chose before, and I'm going to select this in Philippians, and I'm just going to say erase. See where there erase is at the top of the highlighter palette? And that gets rid of it. But while it's selected, now I'm just going to select blue text from my palette. Now it looks identical, but if I go up to my visual filters menu, you'll see now instead of, what was the palette called? Solid colors. I should have a highlighter category called class, or yours is called tech class or whatever. And now when I turn that off and on, my highlighters disappear. As long as you use highlighters that are in that palette from now on, you only have one checkbox to turn off and on, to turn all your manual highlighting off and on. So that's going to be easier. Let's make another one just for fun. Let's make one that's kind of, orange text. Now from here, the advantage is that since we've created these, we don't have to redo everything. If we click on the little expansion arrow, the little context menu next to blue text, you'll notice now I have duplicate. So I can click duplicate. It's going to use all of the same ones that I did before. And now I can use the context arrow and say edit. And now everything is selected like I did before. And now I can just go in and change one thing to change the color. So I'm going to make mine kind of red. And instead of blue text, I'm going to call it red text. And hit save. Now, duplicating when you're talking about these really simple ones that you've started with is not that big a deal. But as you start to create more complex ones that have multiple settings, and you just want to tweak one setting to make a second highlighter, it's easier to duplicate it than to rebuild all of those settings.
So with these highlighters and stuff, could you use it for, like, if you're doing research and you're doing research on a certain topic or something, could you highlight the information that you need to know in, like, individual books and then look up the highlighter and then all that same color would just come up?
Yes, but there's going to be a better way to do that research without using highlighters. It's called clippings, and I'll show you that in a little bit. But yes, you could very well do that, absolutely. All right, so hit save, and now you'll notice I have a blue highlighter and a red highlighter. And so I'm going to go back to Philippians and this idea of saints in Christ. All the saints in Christ Jesus, I'm going to make that red. So I'm going to click my red highlighter. So now I have some red text and some blue text. Again, if I want to strip these away, all I have to do is go up to my visual filters, click off my class highlighter category, and they all go away. But if I want to turn them back on, I don't have to reselect them and re-highlight them. I just go back in, find class, click on it, and they all come back. This is the cool part. Once you write in your paper Bible, you've written in your paper Bible. And there are times when I wish I hadn't written something in my paper Bible. You may find that too. But with this, you can just turn it off. Or you can delete a highlight. So it has a little bit more power. The one thing it doesn't have is the ability to draw arrows from one word to another and do all of that kind of markup that I wish we had. I understand they're working on that kind of thing, but it's going to be a while, I think, because just of the way computers work right now. But we can do all this different kind of highlighting. So let's make a third one that's orange or green. So I'm just going to go down here and duplicate. I'm going to go in and edit. And I'm going to call it green text, and under font styling, I'm going to just select the color green. I'm going to save. So I already have 3 highlighters. So this is font styling. This is just dealing with some of the font style issues. Now the other, I'm going to create a new style here, add a new style. In addition to font styling, we also have background. Now background is where you create the traditional highlighter kinds of looks. Notice you have 3 options: no background, solid color, and natural highlighter. So if I just click from no background to solid color, you'll notice yellow was already chosen, and it makes it just like a traditional yellow highlighter. The only difference is the box is very computerish. I mean, the lines are perfectly straight. It is a true box. If I select natural highlighter, it kind of goes whoosh, like you did it manually. See the difference? They're trying to get it so that it looks like you took a highlighter and went shh, and you wouldn't draw it perfectly straight. So believe it or not, I actually prefer the natural highlighters. They look more natural to me. But you've got options for both, and you can use those differentiations to distinguish different highlighters from one another. And that can have some value, because at some point you need a lot of different kinds of highlighters. We're going to look at that. So click on natural highlighter. You've got colors, and you've got all these colors to choose from. Now, here's the problem with highlighting the background. Pick a really dark color, like this dark red, and look at your preview. What do you see?
Mush.
You see the dark red, but you can't really read the text that's underneath it. So when you make these background highlighters, you really have a limited number of options in this palette. And I'm going to tell you these last 2 columns on the right and a few of the colors in this second column are usable. Most of the colors on this first column on the left aren't usable. They're just too dark for background colors, okay? So just pick something in that second or third row. I'm just going to pick kind of a weird, bluish pink color. And you can see even that makes it a little hard to do. But I'm just going to call this blue highlighter. Now I'm going to save it. And now when you select something, grace to you and peace, I want the word grace. I'm going to just select the word grace, and I'm going to hit my blue highlighter, and I'm going to select the word peace, and I'm going to hit the blue highlighter.
You like that, huh?
Huh? Now, it doesn't look as bad up there as it does.
No, I mean that natural. I don't like that.
Everybody has their little things. Yeah, I do. I like that it's not so boxy. But if you prefer the structured box kind of thing, that's great. I mean, that's the cool part of this is you can make these highlighters any way that you want. You can customize this to your heart's content. Now, I want to show you one thing that's kind of cool. I don't like this blue highlighter. The reason I don't like it is because I think it's a little too dark. Okay, so I'm just going to go in here and I'm going to edit my blue highlighter, and I'm going to change this background color to a lighter, paler blue, and I'm going to save it. Did you notice what happened in my text?
Change.
When I edited the highlighter, these changed automatically. Okay, so they're connected. As long as you understand that connection. Anything I now do to this blue highlighter, it wouldn't make much sense since it's blue, but I could change the color to yellow at this point. Or orange or whatever. I'm going to make it yellow and I'm going to resave it. Now it doesn't make sense to call it blue highlighter when it's yellow, but you'll notice the text made the updates. So while you're working in this palette, whatever you do in this palette is going to automatically update anything that you've used that highlighter for, which is cool as long as you remember that. And don't start, I mean, if you really want a new highlighter to do something different, don't just modify an old one or everything that was marked that way is going to change, okay? Now, just for the sake of my OCD, I'm going to go back in and make blue highlighter blue because that's going to drive me crazy. To have a yellow highlighter that's actually called blue highlighter, it's not cool. All right. Are we starting to get this idea of background? Now, in addition, I'm going to choose a new style. So you've got solid, natural, and no background at all. Those are your options under background. The next section is text effects. Now, text effects does some interesting stuff. One is you've got glow. And what glow does is it takes whatever color and it just kind of outlines all of the lettering with that particular color. I don't go crazy with this, but I do like a yellow one. You can do some of these paler colors, and they don't really hurt the readability much. You can see some of the colors I'm playing with. Just enough to make it pop and show that it's not a normal black word on the screen, but it's kind of a more subtle kind of highlight. So I'm going to just make one that's a yellow glow, and I'm going to call it yellow glow. I almost always describe my highlighters with the color that I'm dealing with, not just say glow, because I'm going to have multiple glows. So one's yellow, one's green, one's orange. And I'll just say yellow glow, whatever. In addition to glow, you have outline. And outline gets weird. Outline kind of makes the text look hollow. I'm going to go up to font styling and make mine bigger so that you can see it better on the screen. You can play with it on your screen, and I'm going to make it bold so it shows up. But you see what it's doing? It's actually drawing a little, it's actually making the outline makes the text hollow and fills the inside of the text with the color you choose. So that to me is backwards. If it was telling me that it was going to outline the text and I choose a color, you'd think it would outline the text with the color I choose. What it really does is it makes the text hollow and puts the color that I choose inside the text. It's outlined with black. You follow?
It mixes the colors and kind of changes the color of the text even.
Well, it makes the text whatever color you chose, but it's got a black outline around it. The outline isn't the color you choose. The inside of the text is the color you choose. See it? I don't like outline. Outline drives me crazy. There are a lot of these that kind of start to look like a ransom note to me, and I don't like the ransom note thing. So I'm going to go back to glow. And then you've got shadow. Shadow takes whatever color and gives your text a drop shadow. Now, that's another one that can be really irritating because it just does weird depth things to you if you're not careful. But you can go ahead and play with the different colors that you can set on the glow, and you can see. Now, again, the dark colors in that first column don't work very well for glow or for shadow because it makes the text not very readable. So really the best shadow colors are these lighter colors, and that way the text stays readable, but it does make it stand out enough that you can kind of tell that it's different from everything else. Do you see what's going on with those? All right. I'm going to turn none off for that. The next is borders and outlines. Now, or just borders and lines. Borders and lines is kind of cool, and it gives you this visual representation of where you're drawing your lines. So, for example, right now it's saying that you're going to do a solid line in black. And if you click on the choice, you've got solid line, dashed lines, dotted lines, dash and dots, wavy, jaggy, rippled, natural, all these kind of. Just stay with solid with me for a second. And you're just going to do a single line. Whatever gray line you click on in this little diagram is where it's going to put the line. So you can put a line just above the text. You can put a line above and below the text. You can draw a box around it if you wanted to. You can underline it, and underlining the text. You can strike through, is that middle line. You can also set these lines in front of and behind the word so that it kind of puts it in a form of a bracket a little bit. So I'm going to choose above and below. So basically I'm drawing, and I'm going to change my color to like orange. I'm going to make it an orange line above and below my text. And I'm going to call this orange lines. Huh?
You have oranges lines.
Oranges lines? And now when I select something in Philippians, a prayer offered with joy, I can make it orange lines. Now see, I had made mine bigger because I was demoing and I don't like larger text. See how it starts to look weird when you make your text bigger? I don't like it. You may love it. I know. So I need to go back here and make my text 100% and say. And now it's just going to put orange lines above the text and make it stand out. So you're starting to see all the options, and you can combine any number of these. You can combine text styling with backgrounds, with lines. The next category, I'm just going to add a new style, is image. Now, you can choose to put an image before or behind or in front of, and you can change the style, but notice it says click to choose an image. When you click, you actually have a bunch of these weird little hand-drawn images that Logos gives you. So let's find one that's, I don't like any of these. Let's find this big old check mark. I'm going to put the check mark in, and notice where it put it, okay? It put it right before the word. Now I can put it before the word. I can center it so that it's right over the word. I can put it at the end of the word. I can put it after the word. I can even put it all the way out in the margin of the verse. I can put it in the left margin or the right margin. So you have all kinds of choices. Now, I don't think color does change the graphic. Cool. I don't like these little hand-drawn graphics. They get a little weird for me. And I can also change the size. I can make it smaller if the check mark is too big. But you have all these graphics. You can also make your own. I'm not going to teach you how to do that, but on the Logos website, you can find out you can make your own graphics. You can do all your own custom graphics, and that's why I say there's literally millions of options here. You can draw all your own symbols and dump them in here and make highlighters that have your own symbols associated with them. And so the check mark, I'm going to put the check mark before the word. I'm going to make it 100%, and I'm going to make it blue.
If you click your box, with your check mark there, Michael, you see it where it says choose a file. What is it?
Right.
That's where you go.
That's where you would after you create a graphic, you would click on that to upload your graphic to Logos. But you got to make the graphic first. And I think you have to make it in and save it in a PNG file. I don't remember. I haven't made the graph. I don't like this. To me, this is hokey looking. I get how it could be cool with doing all the custom stuff. I just haven't. And so I always forget what file format. But there's a special file format you need to save your graphic in, and then you can click choose file, and you can find it on your computer, and it'll dump it in. So I'm just going to call this one blue check mark. Blue check. Save it. Now here's why I don't like them. I'm going to just choose this word confident, and I'm going to click my blue check. See, it just kind of,
Put a big gap in.
yeah, it puts a big gap in the text to put this symbol in. I don't know. To me, that doesn't tell me what I highlighted very well. Now, what I could do is I could edit the blue check. So I'm going to go back and edit blue check, and I'm going to, instead of just the check mark, I'm going to go to borders and lines, and I'm also going to underline with the same blue maybe, and save it. And now it looks like at least the check mark is associated with the word confident. But not really. It's hard for me to tell. And if I move the check mark to the center of the word, where it just puts a check mark over the word, which is the way most of these graphics are used in their examples. So I go to the check mark, I go to image, and instead of before, I put it center and save it. It should put it right over the middle of the word, but now I can't tell that it's a check mark. So, again, I see what they're doing, and it's cool. They've given you all of these options, but sometimes having options and having usable options are kind of two different things. And to me, this is the difference between having infinite options and having an infinite group of usable options. And in this case, I don't find these particularly usable. So I don't tend to use them, but I felt compelled to show you how to do it. Let's do one more new style, and then we're going to play with why we're making all of these. You've got insert text. Now this is one that I use. And I don't usually insert text before, but notice you've got text before, text after, text above, and text below. Okay? So now there are two that I want you to make. And I want you to think through this with me. When you took exegesis class, and for a couple of you that haven't had exegesis yet, you might have heard this in a class anyway. One of the things that we learned is that imperatives, oftentimes in Greek, are associated with what other kind of word? Denny will cry.
I'm guessing a petition, maybe.
Close. Starts with a P. Participles, right? When you have an imperative followed by a string of participles, the participles tell you how to accomplish the imperative, okay? So when you have exegesis class again, to pass it, you'll know. Okay, so what I like to do is I like to create some highlighters that will help me identify that. So we're going to make an imperative and a participle highlighter. And I'll show you how we're going to use it automatically, not manually later. So text above, I just want you to put IMP. You can do it in all caps. You can do it in all lowercase. Now, you'll notice this is kind of big. So what I usually do is I usually change the size on this to like 60%. Now, it makes it particularly tiny, but big enough that you can read it. If 80% is better for this example, make it 80%. And then I also am going to say background highlighter. You can use a solid color, not the natural if you don't like the natural. Make it green. Because you can use a light green, but imperatives are something you have to do, so you have to go, and green is the green light go. So imperatives, green. And call this highlighter imperatives. And save it. Now in this case, I want to do it exactly the same, but I'm going to change the text, and I'm going to change the color. So this is a great opportunity for me to just duplicate this, rather than create it from scratch. And then edit it. And so go to Insert Text, and instead of IMP above it, I'm going to type part. Simple. Going to leave it the same size. And then I'm also going to change the background color to a blue. And I'm going to call this one participle. And save it. So now I have an imperatives and a participle. Now, do you notice how it's organizing these alphabetically?
Yeah.
Computers always organize, not always, but most of the time, computers organize lists alphabetically. Do you know how to force things to the top of an alphabetical list in a computer? Anybody? Start the word with a space. Watch what happens. I'm going to go I'm going to edit my imperative one. And instead of just calling it imperatives, I'm going to call it space imperative. I just hit the space bar and hit save. Watch what happens. Not a thing. That's really silly. Everything does that. Everywhere. It does. Oh, because it didn't stick. Why did it not stick? Oh, it changes it. Wow. That's lame. Okay. Go to rename, and instead of naming it imperative, you can just rename it to, you don't have to open it. Put an underscore in front of it. Just hold your shift key and put an underscore, and now that should make it go to the top. There you go. So if you want to organize things outside of alphabetically, and now I can rename my participles, and I can put them together at the top of my list by starting them both with an O. It's interesting that it won't do it with spaces. If you're filing files in your computer system and you put a space in front of the file name, it'll always take it to the top. Why it's not doing that here. But now my imperatives and my participles are in the front. So you got this idea of how to create custom. Yeah.
So you can't drag and move them, but by putting underscores, it then alphabetizes the underscored ones at the top.
First, and then everything else after that, right?
If you wanted to group the ones that you changed the text color, you would put a different symbol in the front of them.
You could. You put an @ symbol. I use @ symbols sometimes to group all of those together. So you can create kind of these subgroups by starting the names of your highlighters with a particular symbol, and that'll put them all together. Now there's one more that I want to show you, and then we're going to do some cool automated stuff. And that is creating a list. The other thing that we talked about, most likely you talked about in exegesis class, was the Bible is full of lists, right? You see these structures. Well, being able to create a highlighter that marks the lists becomes valuable. So create a new style. And go to Insert Text. And text before, type the number 1. And then right next to the text, you notice it says capsule. Click on capsule. Now this is going to look a little different whether you are on a PC or a Mac. The little bubble will look a little different depending. But do you see what it did? It put the 1 in a little circle. And so then the other thing I do is I go to Borders and Lines, and I select Underline, and I usually do a double underline, and try to choose that same blue. Now when you name this, name it 01 list. That'll make sense when we get to 10. And save it. And so now I have 1 list. I want you to make 10 of these. So duplicate it. Edit the duplication. go under insert text and change the 1 to a 2. Change the name to 02 list. And keep doing that until you have 10 of them.
What are we naming these?
Just call them a 01 list, 02 list, 03 list, and so on, so that it organizes them together. The main reason I'm having you do this is just for the practice of creating multiples, but we also are going to need lists. I'm going to stop at 7. Because I have these elsewhere. I don't need to rebuild them all. If you've got 5 or 6 done, that's okay for now, but eventually make 10 of them. You'll need about 10. Most of the time, most lists don't even use 10 in the list, but there are a couple of long lists that I have found where I've needed that many, so once you make 10, you've got them all. But then go to Philippians 2, verse 2, and I'll show you how I use this. Paul says, make my joy complete by being of the same mind, maintaining the same love, united in spirit, intent on one purpose, do nothing from selfish or empty conceit, but with humility of mind, regard one another as more important than yourself. There's a list here, isn't there, that he's telling us is involved in making his joy complete. What's the first thing? How do we make his joy complete? What's the first thing?
Being of the same mind.
So, being of the same mind. So I'm going to select being of the same mind.
Yeah, I'm having trouble highlighting just that phrase.
Yeah. I am too.
I turned off everything, all the textual stuff, and I haven't had a problem.
Okay. If we go in and do Bible text only under the visual filters, that might help. Didn't help mine.
Nope, didn't change mine.
You can do of the same mind.
Yeah, you can do of the same mind, but that's interesting. They've changed something that doesn't allow us to select as easily. So, of the same mind, and click list 1.
Just be.
Maintaining the same love, click list 2. United in spirit. That first one is the only one that it didn't seem to want to select. 3. Intent on one purpose. 4. Do nothing from selfishness or empty conceit. I mean, those are part of the same command. You could say that that's 5 and 6, but 5. And with humility of mind, regard one another as more important. 6. So now you can see in your text that you have this list, and this list is identified. This becomes a great tool to mark lists in your text when you find it. Now, it's a manual process, but you can break down these lists. Now, if the list is in your way, all you have to do is go up to your visual filters, turn off that highlighting palette, and they all go away. Turn the highlighting palette back on. Your lists all pop back up. And that's going to be anywhere in your Bible. So any place that you've marked these highlighters, they're going to show up. Old Testament, New Testament, doesn't matter. Other resources, books, other kinds of books, doesn't matter. The visual filters you can turn off and on. And so this is a great way to mark lists. So you got this idea of custom highlighters? All right. Now, so far what we've done is we've just, excuse me, we've just manually been doing our highlighting. Now's the time to leverage what we learned with the last class with morphological searches with these highlighters in something that's called visual filters. Under your documents menu, you have a category called visual filters. I just want you to click visual filter. Now what visual filter does is it's similar to a search, but it's going to do something very different. You have 3 types of visual filters: a basic, a Bible, and a morphological. These are all just like the searches we did. Okay, they work exactly the same way the searches did. You have a find box, but you also have a formatting palette. So what happens here is right now, I want to do a morph search. I'm going to show you the coolest one first. I'm going to do a morph search, and we just talked about exegetically, imperatives followed by participles are structures you're always looking for, right? So I want to create a visual filter that helps me identify imperatives followed by a string of participles. So in the find box, what's the first thing I'm going to type in order to find imperative verbs?
At.
The at symbol, just like an email. So at, verb, and I don't care, I'm in Anderson Forbes Aramaic morphology. I'm not looking for Aramaic, am I? So I got to change this to Logos Greek morphology. That becomes important. So now when I type the at V symbol, the at symbol, and select verb, I get all the Greek. I really don't care about tense or voice. What I care about is mood. I just want imperative verbs, right? I don't care what tense, I don't care what voice, I just want to find all the imperative verbs. So click verb and then click imperative. And then in the formatting palette, scroll down until you find your custom palette, your new one that you just made. You got to get past all the other ones that Logos has already given you. I know that's why I wish we could get rid of them or rearrange them, but that's just the way it works. And I'm going to select my imperative highlighter. And then I'm going to do the same thing for participles. In the next find box, I'm going to say at verb, and I'm going to find participle. It's a mood as well. You don't want particle in parts of speech. You want the mood participle. And I'm going to select my formatting. And I'm going to scroll all the way down. I know it's a pain. There's nothing I can do to help you there. And I'm going to select participles. At least I thought I was selecting participles. There we go. Now, look at my range at the top. All morph text, all passages, all resources. I don't want all resources. I just want my New American Standard. So click on all resources and just select New American Standard, since that's the one we've got open, with Logos Greek morphology. And notice what happened over here. What happened in Philippians?
The imperatives.
The imperatives and participles popped up.
Are all marked.
Yeah.
Now, did you have to manually do that? No. Now, remember with searches, when you open a search, it highlights the words in your text, right? But what happens when you close the search box? What happens to the highlighting in your Bible? It goes away, right? That it's not really sympathetic highlighting, but it's that idea that when a search box is open, it marks all those words, but when you close the search, that all goes away. Guess what? That doesn't happen with visual filter. So at the top of the visual filter, click where it says Untitled Visual Filter, and call this Imperatives and Participles. Now I'm going to add the word class to mine so I can delete it, because this will be like the 27th imperative participles filter I've created. And just hit enter. And now close that visual filter box. Notice what happens. All of your participles and imperatives stay highlighted in your Bible. Go to Colossians 1. And just start to scan through the book of Colossians. What do you see?
Lots of participles.
Lots of. Do you see many commands?
No.
No. Keep scrolling. Look at chapter 2, verse 6. Therefore, as you have received Christ Jesus the Lord, so walk in him. The command is to walk. How do you walk in him? How do you accomplish that command?
By having been firmly rooted,
Being firmly rooted,
built up,
being built up,
established in your faith,
established in your faith,
overflowing
with gratitude. There's a 4-part sermon for you just looking at imperatives and participles in Colossians chapter 2, verse 6 and 7. Everybody's smiling. Isn't this cool? Keep scrolling down. Look at Colossians 2, verse 18. Let no one keep defrauding you of your prize. That's a command. Well, thanks a lot, Paul. How do I keep people from defrauding me of my prize? Delighting in self-abasement. taking a stand on visions he has seen, inflated without cause by his fleshly mind.
Not holding fast.
Those are all ways that people try to defraud you of your prize. Keep scrolling through. Start to see a bunch of participles and lists. Look at Colossians 3:16. Let the word of Christ richly dwell within you. That's a command. Okay, thank you, Paul. How do I allow the word of Christ to richly dwell within me?
By teaching,
Admonishing
and
one
singing.
another with psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs.
And singing.
Singing with thankfulness to the Lord.
And giving.
And potentially giving thanks. Do you see how we're starting to find these? Now, turn to James chapter 4. Anything stand out to you in James chapter 4?
Lots of imperatives.
10 imperatives in 4 verses? You think that's significant? Now, you might be able to determine this just by looking, by reading and examining, but now visually, as you scan through this, you're going to see these patterns of imperatives and participles. And the cool thing is, now that we've created this visual filter once, we never have to create it again. All we have to do is go up to our visual filters menu, scroll down, and under notes, actually there's a section for visual filters. You should have one now called participles and imperatives.
Mm-hmm.
Click on it, and they all go away. And the next time you want to do some exegetical work involving participles and imperatives, all you have to do is go to this visual filter. You don't have to create it again. Scroll all the way down till I find it, because it's way down at the bottom of my list. Turn on imperatives and participles, and go to Ephesians 5:19. Do not get drunk with wine, for that is dissipation, but be filled with the Spirit. Okay? How do we become filled with the Spirit? Speaking to one another in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, singing and making melody in our heart to the Lord, always giving thanks, and be subject to one another. So, little point of doctrine here. What about people that come to worship and don't sing?
They're not filled with the Spirit.
They're not demonstrating that they're being filled with the Spirit, are they? That's a connection that we can make from this text. And the way we can see it so clearly is to follow this idea of imperatives followed by participles. And now understand what we're doing here. We're identifying Greek imperatives and Greek participles. You guys are in Greek too, right? Right about now, you should be trying to memorize participle forms. Anybody finding it easy? Participles get kind of weird sometimes, and memorizing the forms and the changes in the forms can be a struggle. This identifies it from the English, shows you the results of the English, even though it's looking at Greek participles. Now, if that's not cool, I don't know what is. I mean, this saves you a ton of time. You follow? So, I'm going to turn off imperatives and participles for a second. And we're going to create another visual filter. And in this case, I didn't want to turn off all my visual. Now I got to wait. Sorry. One of the things I'm learning, especially, I have a lot of visual filters created. And one of the things I'm learning in Logos6 is they've just started this idea that you can turn off all your visual filters at once, or you can turn off all your highlighters at once. But the more visual filters you have, when you click that button, you get the pinwheel of death on the Mac. Or it'll just lock up your PC for a while, and you just have to wait. Even when they're not on, it takes a while. And I didn't want to do that. So now I got to click on it again to turn it back on, which is going to give me this beach ball of death.
Is it going to turn on just the ones you had on? Or
Yeah, it's only going to turn on the ones I had on, but it's got to go through them all. And make them all available. Okay, so I'm going to turn off imperatives and participles. Do what I want you to do. Okay, so we've started looking at this concept of keywording a book, right? At least as far as frequency of words go. Well, one of the things I had you do is I had you do these searches and store them in your favorites. That's what we did this whole last class. Those of you that weren't here, try to stay up with what we're doing. But I'm going to show you now how to leverage those searches into a visual filter that actually marks the keywords of a book in the book. Now, this is something I've done for just about every book in my New Testament and most of my Old Testament books. And it's something that we do manually in our paper Bibles. But doing them in our Logos Bibles is particularly cool. And it really can be helpful as we study through a particular text. So I'm sorry I clicked on that, and it's still taking a second to finish. Come on. Now, yours may not be doing this because you don't have very many visual filters, but as you get more, it's going to get worse. Yeah, Jess?
Well, I was just going to see, should it be showing up these visual filters in all of our parallel resources as well?
No, because you built this one just for your New American Standard,
Okay.
right? Now, if you change that to all resources, let's look at this for just a second. How do I edit these visual filters? I go up to Documents. And if you remember, I had you categorize or organize this list by type. Make sure that you click type up here in the column headers so that it organizes all your visual filters together and everything else together. Inside your visual filters area, you should now at the very top have this newest one that you did that's imperatives and participles. If you click on it, it's going to open that original box. Now, I only marked it in the New American Standard Bible. So if I click on that, notice what my choices are. I can open it in all Bibles. I can open it in collections. Do you remember we created a collection that we called Favorite English Bibles? Mm-hmm. Click on Favorite English Bibles and just then close that visual filter again. And now it should be in any one of those 5 favorite Bibles. So I'm in my New American Standard. I'm going to go ahead and turn that filter back on. Sorry. Turn imperatives and participles back on. There it is. I'm going to go to my parallel resources. And if I go to the ESV, it's one of my my favorite English Bibles as well. All the imperatives and participles are marked there as well. I go to my New King James. Give it a second. Maybe New King James is, I was modifying that when I was playing with you guys, so maybe I took the New King James out of my favorite English Bibles, but they should be marked. Go to Oh. Just turned on? No. Should be marked in my New King James. I'm not sure why it's not. Anybody else have, when they switch Bibles, they disappear? Did you check a couple of your favorite English Bibles to see if it shows up in multiple translations?
Yeah.
Did it work?
Yeah.
Okay. So mine's just doing weirdness. I'll have to look at why. Oh, somehow the filter got turned off in all of them. That could be it. Okay, my computer's doing weirdness this morning, so that doesn't help. All right, so, but the reason it only showed up in one Bible is because that's what we told it to do. You can do it in all Bibles, you can do it in a collection. The one thing you don't want to do is you don't want to leave it set to all resources. Because that means even when you're reading in commentaries, if there's a Greek imperative, it's going to highlight it. Well, you know, when you're in a commentary, you don't care that they're going to tell you what they're talking about. You don't need those Greek words highlighted in those things. So I usually avoid turning on all resources for my visual filters. All right, so let's start working on how we then categorize these for keywords in a book. Now, here's the problem: we don't have enough highlighters yet to really do this. So what I want you to do, while my computer is doing weirdness, and I'm going to go ahead and restart it to try to fix it, is I want you to create like 5 or 6 different colored highlighters. Now, we could use one of the other palettes, but it's good practice for you, and plus I got to force my computer to do silly stuff. So make like 5 or 6 different colored, just regular highlighters with the background color yellow, green, blue, red, whatever.
Under the same palette, though?
Yeah, keep
Okay.
them in your palette. That's why I don't want to just use the ones that are already made. And I'm going to make Logos obey my commands.
Anyone in here got an HP?
Yeah.
How charged are you?
Oh, I'm good. Need the cord?
Yeah, I forgot mine.
Battery?
Yeah.
Page 22, the actual highlighter, looks like it kind of fades out.
That one.
Oh.
They really did try to make it look like how you would swipe a highlighter.
At least one of us had it.
I hate that though. I guess my OCD when I mess up on a highlighter, because I know it's permanent, you know. It just bugs me.
Yeah. Well, the nice thing about this is it's not permanent. You know, you can change it, you can delete it, you can do anything you want. All right. So. Now, just to show you some of what I've done, in my highlighters palette, not the one for class, but the one that I actually use for my own, I've called my palette My Highlighters. And when you look at what I've got, I did, these two are cool. Bookend start and bookend finish, or bookend end. Talk about bookends, right? In a text, you'll have, like James chapter 4, verse 6, God is opposed to the proud, but gives grace to the humble. And then in verse 10, he says, humble yourselves. Those are bookends. And so I would mark the humble in verse 6 with bookend start. I would mark humble in verse 10 as bookend end. And I know that I'm looking at a set of bookends in the text. So I've created some bookends. Look at how many colored highlighters I've created. 32 of them. The reason is because when you start to keyword the Gospels, for example, the Gospel of John, you will easily come up with 25 or more keywords in the Gospel of John. And so you need a big set of highlighters so that you can mark them all differently. Right? I have a bunch of other things, imperatives, participles. I have my list. Now, this is why I had you mark your list and call your list items 01 list. Because if you don't call it 01, it puts 1 and 10 together and 11 together because they all start with a 1. But by calling it 01, 02, 03, it puts the number 10 in the right spot. Now, it wasn't worth it to me to rename all mine. But that gets to be a pain. You go to look for number 2, and it's actually the 4th or 5th one down the list.
Michael?
Yes?
Before we get too far from where this question popped in my mind, I know that not everything on Logos will translate over or work in other devices like iPads and such. Visual filters do, correct?
No.
I
The
mean,
one,
not,
highlighters do, as long as you manually highlight,
Yeah.
they'll show up in your iPad or on your iPhone. As long as you manually do it like we were doing before in Philippians, where we're just selecting stuff and deleting and highlighting it. But these automatic visual filters like the imperatives and participles don't.
they don't, okay.
The key wording ones that we're going to create now, they don't either. So I'll show you a manual way to do it, so they would show up in your but it is much more manual, okay? But it's doable.
Which if you're marking those in your Bible manually anyway, it's,
Well, but I'm going to show you a way to mark them automatically in your text so that you don't have to go find each verse and do a manual highlight. There's a cool way to do that. But yeah, visual filters aren't mobile yet. I'm hoping that that's something that they're working on now. But I've created a bunch of different underliners and so on. These are basically my core highlighters that I use. So you should by now have a few solid colored ones. I'm just going to use my highlighters. Now, I'm going to give you a strategy. I don't care if you use it or not, okay? But one of the things with marking colors in your Bible, especially when we talk about marking keywords, if you don't have some kind of a system set up when you first start, your Bible's going to eventually get pretty chaotic. For example, I did not have a system for marking my paper Bible when I first started, other than I'm going to mark my keywords in different colors. But I didn't really think about what colors for what words. I just kind of went, okay, James, one of the first keywords is brethren. So, okay, I'll grab orange. And then works is green, and then something else is blue. And then I'm in 1 Peter, and the first one was like, okay, the most common word is pasco, suffer. I'm going to grab a blue one and highlight it blue. I've since changed my mind on that. Now, there's two theories here. One is decide now that you want to mark all of the same words the same color. So, whatever color you mark faith in a book, you'll try to mark faith the same color in all the books.
Auto highlighter.
I don't like that, okay? The reason I don't like that is because sometimes faith is a more important word in one book than another. What I do is I've numbered my highlighters intentionally because the number one most frequently occurring word in the book is my number one highlighter. It's yellow. So now when I see a yellow word highlighted in Logos, I know that not only is it a keyword, but it's the most frequently occurring keyword in the book. Number 2 is orange. Number 3 is red. Number 4 is blue. Number 5 is green. Now, once I get past number 5, I don't care anymore. Now, I still do them in order of my list. I've numbered them all, and I still do them in order. But I've memorized in my head yellow, orange, red, blue, green. Yellow's number 1, orange is number 2, red's number 3, blue is number 4, green is number 5. If I see a green highlighted word in one of my digital books, I know it's the 5th most frequently occurring word in the book. Are you following my logic? Now, that may be too, specific for you. Maybe it's a little too OCD. That's fine. You don't have to follow a system like that. But I recommend that you do. And then the other thing that I do is I match my digital marking with my real world marking now. So my number 1 word is yellow in my paper Bible. My number 2 is orange, my number 3 is red. And I actually have a set of colored pencils that I use to mark keywords in my Bible, and I number them. I literally have a number on each one. And they match this setup as much as possible so that I'm not looking at different colors in each setup. Does that make sense? Now, that's a lot of work. Like I said, maybe for some of us that aren't OCD, that seems like I'm being really, really weird. That's okay. For me, that's what works. And that has brought some logic to this whole process other than There's just lots of things that are marked with lots of colors, okay? So, I'm going to go ahead and turn off my imperatives and participles filter, and we're going to start to play with this idea of how we mark a key word in a book. Now, when we go to do this, we can do it through two ways. We can do it manually, and if we do it manually, it'll show up in our mobile devices, or we can do it automatically. We're going to start with automatic. So I want to create a new visual filter. So I'm just going to go down here to visual filter. Now, I suggest that you do your visual filters by book for keywords, not try to do all of the keywords in the entire New Testament in one visual filter, okay? So, we just did our homework. We just did 2 Thessalonians, right? You should have a list. Some of you may or may not have a list, but we should have a list of keywords in 2 Thessalonians in our favorites. So open your favorites palette so that you have those searches. Now, if you guys don't have these searches done because you weren't here or you didn't do your homework, I'm going to show you how to do it on the fly as we go, but it's going to be easier if you have it already in your visual filter. So here are my keyword lists for 2 Thessalonians, right, in my favorites. For example, Lord is the first word, right, the most frequently occurring theologically significant word, and so I'm going to do that search. Now, if you didn't do this, just do a morph search in 2 Thessalonians in your New American Standard, root, kurios, okay? Now, I don't care about this search. What I care about is this word, okay, this search. So, root, and I'm just going to select it and copy it to my clipboard. And then I'm going to go to my visual filter, and in the find, I'm going to paste in root kurios. And then I'm going to go to my formatting, and for me, I'm going to select the first highlighter in my custom highlighter list. Now, we don't have to open all these searches. We can just reconstruct them, and this is one way that I'll help the guys that weren't here the other day to understand how to do a root search. In the next find box, do the next word. What's the next most frequently occurring word in 2 Thessalonians? From your lists.
God.
God, right? So root, and start to type theos. Aha. I goofed. What did I goof on? Why is it not giving me Greek words? I'm not in morph. I have to change this form to morph. And if I change to morph, now I've got to look at this query and I've got to fix some things. First of all, my passage needs to be 2 Thessalonians. I don't want all resources. I just want my New American Standard Bible. And I don't want Logos Aramaic. I want Logos Greek morphology. So I should have done that before I started this, but since I didn't. So type root, theos, T-H-E-O, and you should get
Well, if you click on
If you click God, it changes it, yeah.
Yeah, but I don't like that. That's interesting. It used to show you even in the visual filters the Greek words.
Did it do that with kurios?
I don't know. I just copied and pasted it in.
Well, when I did it on kurios, it brought up Lord.
Okay. And I'm going to just select my second highlighter. It used to give you Greek if you tried to transliterate Greek. What's the next word in 2 Thessalonians from your list? Third word, I mean.
Jesus.
Jesus, yeah.
Okay. So, root. Select Jesus. Create another highlighter. What do you have next? Work, Aragon. So root, Aragon. And select your next highlighter. And we'll do one more since you guys probably only created 5 or 6 highlighters. What's your next word in 2 Thessalonians?
Let's do them.
Okay, faith. Or believe. Select your next highlighter.
That doesn't seem to work. If you type the English.
No, because you're saying root. Because you're asking for the root, there is no English root. It doesn't, that's not part of the metadata in the Bible.
Yeah.
So, okay, so your visual filter should look like this at this point. Now, go ahead and click on where it says Untitled Visual Filter. And there's 2 ways to name these. If you want to keep all your keyword visual filters together, you can do something like KW, 2 Thess, right? That's my little key. This is a keyword visual filter for 2 Thessalonians. The advantage of that is then all of your keyword visual filters will be together. You might do, like, imperatives and participles might be a Greek visual filter, so you might do a GK, imperatives and participles, so that all your Greek visual filters stay together and so on. But you'll organize that and figure out how to do that best as you go along. Now the cool part of this, even with this visual filter open, is take your Bible to 2 Thessalonians.
I had mine open while
Yeah.
I was doing that, and it was showing it as.
Yeah, it does it automatically. I mean, as you put each one in, it highlights it. But now you've got all of the keywords, well, at least the first 5, most frequently occurring words in the book of 2 Thessalonians already highlighted in your Bible, automatically. You didn't have to go verse by verse and find them. Ta-da! Now, over time, as you map these things out, you can create these visual filters for every book of the Bible and turn them off and on as you need them. For example, if I go to James, I'm going to close this visual filter. If I go to James right now, nothing is highlighted, right? So I look through. But I can go to my visual filters, and under the visual filters section, I should have a James keywords. I turn it on, and there are all of the keywords of James marked just like they would be in my paper Bible throughout the entire text of James. So as I'm studying a particular section, I can see what keywords are most significant in that area. Look at how many times in 4, 11, and 12 you've got the idea of law or judge or speak. This is a real help to you exegetically.
If, because we're just sampling today, I didn't like how I highlighted that. How do I get rid of all that?
Well, you can do one of 2 things. You can just delete the visual filters, so go up to the documents. And like, I don't want this KW 2 Thessalonians filter either. So in visual filters, right click on this
And just get rid of it.
and say delete, and it's going to get rid of that visual filter. And then you can just go to your highlighting palette and you can change anything you want. Yeah, we're kind of doing this kind of fast. So think through this. I would suggest that you, some evening very soon, just make yourself a series of about 25 highlighters of one kind or another that you are going to use to do this kind of thing, to mark keywords. Now you'll notice that what happens when I show you my highlighters palette, I only have about 10 that are solid colors, and then I had to start doing weird things with lines and stuff, because the other colors that are available to me are too dark to really work very well. I mean, I've got a limited set of colors available. And so I started adding lines to those colors. And then I started drawing natural boxes around the colors. And just anything that makes the highlighter look different from everything else. I mean, you just want something that visually looks unique. And so create as many of them as you can. You probably need about 30 total. Maybe even a little bit more for a couple of the Gospels. Luke has quite a few. Matthew has quite a few. John has quite a few. But you can see that now I can kind of see endurance. Endurance looks the same. Sin, sinner, sin, sin, all looks the same. And so they stand out as part of those visual filters. So create yourself a good big set of highlighters. This is your 64 crayons, right? This is your Crayola box, and you can make them any way you want. You can do anything you want with them. But as you want to mark things, you need a variety of things to choose from. Otherwise, things start to look too similar. The other thing for me is I'm a little red-green colorblind. So sometimes some of the light colors are hard for me to distinguish. They look fine in the color palette over here in my highlighter menu, but when I actually color text with them, because it's now blended with the black, it's hard for me to differentiate the difference between those two colors. So for you, test them in a text. Just grab something and highlight it so that you can kind of play with it. Now there's one other thing that I've done that I mentioned previously, but I haven't mentioned yet today, and that is you'll notice that in my color palette, all of these highlighters have this letter next to them. What you can do is if you go to your context menu for your particular custom highlighter that you've created, you can assign a shortcut key. And the shortcut key, for me, my logic was my number 1 is A, my number 2 is B, my number 3 is C. Get it? So now when I want to highlight something with yellow, if I select this, all I have to do is hit my A key. And it gives me my yellow highlighter. If I want to highlight something green, it's B. Now I have to get rid of the first highlight. And now I can hit the B, and it'll highlight it green instead. Follow? Now there's also another shortcut, Command-Shift-K. No. See, I've got my keyboard mapped different. Command-Shift-K or Control-Shift-K should be your erase button. I have my keyboard mapped for Greek, and so when I hit K, it changes my keyboard from English to Greek, so I can't demo that because I use a program that helps me do that differently. So you got an idea how to set up a visual filter for morphology, and now you can do visual filters for the particular roots in a word in a book, and you can actually keyword the entire book. Now again, the problem with that is what Donnie said. If you have an iPad or if you have an iPhone with the Logos app, the only thing that moves over are manual highlights. So I'm going to show you real quick how I do manual highlighting, because there are times that I want a book keyworded in my iPad as well as on my computer. So I'm going to go to Visual Filters and I'm going to turn off my James keywords. I'm going to leave my highlighter palette open because I'm going to need it. But I'm also going to make room here for my searches. And I'm going to open my favorites. Because to do it manually, you really need to have done everything we did in the last class first. Okay? So I'm going to do Second Thessalonians. So I'm going to take my Bible to see. I mapped my keyboard. Sorry. Second Thess. Okay. So I'm in Second Thessalonians. So the first word is Lord, right? So what I do is I open the search for Lord. I use aligned. Now, you talk about a process that takes some time. This takes some time. Now, they're already highlighted for me, right, because I have this search open. But if I close this search, what happens? The highlighting goes away. So what I do is I open the search, and I scan through here, and I manually, like this is the most frequently occurring word for me, so I'm going to select the first word, Lord, and I'm going to hit my A key. Or I'm going to click on my number 1 highlighter. I'm going to select the next one, and I'm going to click my number 1 highlighter. And I'm going to scan through, and I'm going to go, and I'm going to mark each one of these manually. Now, the advantage of this, I'm not going to do these all, but I'm just going to do the first couple. But now, when I close this search box, Lord is highlighted. And the fact that Lord is highlighted is if I go to the visual filters, it's highlighted as part of my highlighters palette. Excuse me. So now when I look in visual filters, I should have my highlighters. So I didn't see my highlighters highlighted. Huh. Okay. Turn up class, they disappear. So
It's under notes in mine.
since it's actually under the class highlighter for mine. And it could be under notes as well. We're going to get to notes. But you can see how that's a manual process, right? You select each word, you highlight it, and then that should transmit over to your mobile device. I'm also going to show you a way when we get to notes to do it from the notes palette. And when you do it from the notes palette, one of the advantages of that is that if you highlight it in your iPad, it's going to show up on your computer when you come back and forth. So how many have the mobile app? Does anybody use the mobile app? Okay, a few people do. So we'll talk about that when we get to notes. You got a sense here of what's going on with these visual filters and how to use them to highlight things and why you need a good set of custom highlighters. So build yourself a good set of custom highlighters this week and have those available for you. All right, one last thing that I want to do. We looked at participles. We looked at imperatives. We also did a search the other day, and you probably saved it in your favorites for petition verbs, didn't we? Now, so you should have it saved in your favorites, right? We drug it over to favorites. Just open that search for a second. And I want to show you a new tool I think this is new in 6, that is going to save us a lot of time. I've got this search that I did for all of the petition verbs. So I might want to create a visual filter that marked all the petition verbs in my New Testament, right? Well, I could rebuild this all in a manual visual filter, but if you go to the search panel up at the top, the detail panel, notice you have a couple of save options. You can save it as a passage list, you can save it as a word list, or you can save it as a visual filter. So now I can say save as visual filter. It's going to paste all of that in for me. All passages, New American Standard, Logos Greek morphology. I can say petition verbs. And now if I go to my Bible and I go to Philippians 4:4 or Philippians 4:2, those petition verbs are marked. And now I have a visual filter that I can turn off and on that have marked that visual filter. Yeah.
So I was trying to pull up my visual filter for the petition verbs. Did you just drag the search bar over into the visual filter to get that, wait a second.
No, you just do save as visual filter. Go to the panel menu, and you've got save as visual filter. You don't have to copy and paste anything. You don't have to do anything. Just click save as visual filter.
Awesome.
It's going to open a new one. It's already going to have pasted in that search for you.
Thank you. Sorry I missed that.
No, that's okay. And then you can select a highlighter, whatever highlighter you want. I'm going to make them purple. And you see that it highlights them. So when you do a search, so now, I hadn't thought of this until, I just learned something new today that now is blowing my mind. These individual searches that we did, like for Lord in 2 Thessalonians, you can open the search, you can save it as a visual filter, and it's automatically going to mark Lord for you. Now, the problem is adding to this. You still then have to add to each one, but it'll do the first one for you at least, so you can get the ball rolling just by doing a save as visual filter. So
That's not a manual entry that will transfer over to.
no. All right, bell's going to ring for chapel in just about 2 minutes. Questions about making highlighters or how to use visual filters to mark these various things? Okay, visual filters are powerful. This is one of the things that sets Logos apart from most of the other programs, is this ability to ask a question. For example, I want to see all the aorist verbs in 2 Peter. Well, I can do a search, but I could also later on set up a visual filter for all of the aorist verbs in 1 Peter, and then all I have to do is turn them on, and it's going to highlight them all green for me, and I can follow them. I don't have to rebuild the search every time. I can just use the visual filters, and I've got visual filters that do all kinds of things for me. Now, one of the cool ones, real quick, before the bell rings, I'm going to show you something neat for your Greek class, if I have time. Visual filter. Morph. Instead of all resources, I'm going to mark by UBS for text, my Greek text. And it's got Greek morphology. So I want to find verbs, just all verbs. Okay, we'll do it after chapel. I don't want to let the cat out of the bag.
Be in suspense the whole time.
Yeah, I know. You're just riveted. You can't wait.
You said that thing we just did with the.
To save as a visual filter from the search box is visual filter. But just being able to do a search and then save it as a visual filter is